story shortly, no? About, for example, the story with Shimomura.
Well, that's a long story. That would go over the 15 to 20 minutes that we have. Essentially, well, is there any specific parts of the story? Because it's too long of a story to really go into. Is there anything in particular interest that you would like me to go over?
Okay.
You know, it's a very long story. Literally, it will take over 20 minutes to tell.
Okay.
Other than just the highlights that Shimomura was a guy that worked at the supercomputer center in San Diego. He and another indicted hacker on the Kevin case, a guy named Mark Lauder, they're reverse engineering the firmware in the Oki 900 cell phone. And they were modifying the firmware to allow them to change the ESN, the electronic serial number, from the keypad. So Shimomura was also friends with a guy named John Markoff, who's the reporter that wrote a story with libelous information about me, just made up information that was eventually published on the front page of the New York Times. So myself and another guy in Israel, we compromised Shimomura's computer system using a technique called IP spoofing, where we essentially, back in those days, firewalls, would allow through what appeared to be like internal IP addresses. So what we can do is spoof a trusted address. And back then, the R services were enabled, like RLogin, RSH. So all we pretty much did is exploit a trusted relationship between two machines and dropped a .r hosts in the root directory with 2 plus signs. So essentially, we could log into the root account with essentially no password. It was through predicting the sequence of packets, which you can't do these days because the sequence numbers are not as easy, not as predictable as they were back, a decade ago. So that's like the story surrounding the compromise of his machine, but there's a larger story with how he was involved in my case and how he was involved with John Markoff.
You paid for your hacking activity with hard jail.
Yeah,
So
I became the government's poster boy for computer hacking.
Yeah, but on the opposite side, you had a big solidarity from all over the world.
A big what?
Solidarity.
Solidarity.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
What are the reasons of all these things? Jail from one side and solidarity from all over the world.
Well, I believe why there was the Free Kevin campaign and why the government treated me harshly is I think there was a number of reasons. I became the example because they needed to send a message and they needed to use somebody as the pawn in the game to send a message to the world that they won't tolerate hacking. And what I did is I took the fall for not only what I did, but what a lot of other people did. And the government treated me with, the prosecutors were so overzealous, they made up myths that I could somehow start a nuclear war by whistling into a payphone. And they had kept me in solitary confinement for about 8 months in a federal detention center because they had told a judge that I can possibly start a nuclear holocaust by just getting access to a prison payphone. The government also was embarrassed because they couldn't find me for a number of years. And a lot of the companies that I compromised to look at source code, like Sun, Motorola, Nokia, Fujitsu, and so on and so forth, they were very well-established companies within the United States, and they had a lot of power as well. But it was really the FBI that was driving the prosecution, or what I call it the persecution of Kevin Mitnick. And then on the other side, there was a New York Times reporter named John Markoff who wanted to write the Kevin Mitnick book. And he and I had a falling out many years ago because he wrote an earlier book called Cyberpunk that contained a lot of untrue, false, and defamatory information about me. And what had happened is he contacted me wanting me to interview for this book. And I go, well, what am I going to get out of it? If you're going to tell my life story, I deserve to make something from the deal. And he goes, well, it would be unethical for me to pay you. I go, that's okay, then it would be unethical for me to interview with you. And what ended